Grand Concourse of Learning. Betrayans Hall. Local time 11:55 hours. Professor Vanavan. Music blared behind the hall's heavy-set doors, marking the end to a class that felt as if it had barely even begun. So sudden was this passage in time that I could even attribute its anomalous pace to the involvement of the most impossible of magics, chronomancy. The involvement of which wouldn't have been so out of place given the week's preceding events, inadvertently catalyzed by a single party. My eyes turned to the aforementioned source of the past week's blights, the purveyor of crisis upon crisis, the very reason why this morning's class had felt so brisk, the Blue Knight. It was her lack of involvement in today's class that had restored a sense of equilibrium and balance, a state of normalcy to the morning's lecture. And it was likewise her incessant involvement that had brought about a week of veritable chaos and the scrutiny of both forces and interests outside of our control. A silent war was now well underway in the back alleys of social intrigue, between the crossroads of academia and noble ambitions. A war which, while ostensibly started by the Earthrealmer, was one which she was not privy to. As the battles were fought not with steel nor fists, but with words and ink. Battles which I would continue to fight, if only to fulfill my oaths and promises to a being I had both successfully managed to analyze, yet woefully failed to predict. My eyes quickly glanced down at the unfinished letter, sitting beneath the pile of homework, a nearly finished rebuttal to the inner guard captain Anoyarius Fratal, as she continued to push forth for an investigation which was soon to proceed into its next phase. A phase which would necessitate the involvement of an indisposed party. A party which was now in the process of toot toot toot, clink clink clink. The Grand Concourse of Learning. Betrayans Hall. Local time 1200 hours. Quiv. Class is dismissed. You may all be excused for lunch in the grand dining hall. The professor spoke softly, or at least that's what it always felt like when the man was up against anything marginally louder than a stray whisper. I silenced those thoughts as quickly as they arose, however, as in spite of my personal reservations on the man's character, this did not detract from his place within the de facto hierarchy and his natural position as a Crownlands-born elf. Authority and rank, title and birthright, inalienable aspects of the greater game which one simply could not ignore, not even for a character as weak as his own. As character alone hardly spoke much for an individual's capacity, if Ping and Booker were of any indication. The former of which now stood up promptly, corralling his own cohort as I did my own, as we slowly filed out of the hall. Though irrelevant to the growing games of Academy intrigue, I couldn't help but to focus on the new Roma's strangeness on this day. A strangeness which began the moment I laid my eyes upon her homework, and one which continued on throughout the course of the morning's lecture. I could, however, attribute the latter to the new Roma's gradual attunement to the social decorum of Nexian academia, as even beings with the thickest of skulls had the capacity to learn and adapt, if only to survive within hostile new environments. Though it was the former matter that had truly lodged itself within the back of my mind, and not for any real concern over the content nor quality of her homework. No. Instead, my concerns lay with the medium through which they were delivered. Her words, or more specifically her handwriting, and her apparent mastery over Nexian calligraphy. Utilizing high script, sans abbreviations, sans simplistic reduction, with not one apparent use of shorthand even when it was socially appropriate. When combined with her new Roma status, and the purposeful lack of meaningful time to prepare what would otherwise take the most gifted of scribes decades to master, her few pages of homework served not as a passing oddity, but a window into a baffling mystery. The simplest solution to this debacle, that she merely used a bespoke enchanted pen, was preposterous. Even ignoring the apparent shielding of mana granted by her armor, thus relinquishing any and all ability to interact with enchanted items, there was still the matter of intent behind her script. Yes, each and every letter was perfect. But the fact that each and every letter of each and every word was written in high script, with all of the flourishes and serifs that came with it, this was near obsessive degrees of penmanship, which could only imply that she had either been specifically trained or held some form of impregnable iron-willed discipline, the lacks of which were only comparable to the zealous intensity of Ping's piety. But perhaps I was merely overthinking things. Perhaps this was simply just a question of practice skill. Perhaps there really wasn't anything more to ponder. But when one factors in the new Roma's proclivities for the eccentric, this unexpected development provided yet another aspect of her being to be wary of, as whatever it was that lay beneath that armor was a dormant threat lying in waiting. A sleeping dragon whose capacity for the impossible was only rivaled by their discipline. Even if that discipline seemed lacking in much of their social interactions. Lord Ratom? A voice suddenly broke me out of my reverie. A soft, high-pitched, purposefully inoffensive voice. Yes, Lord Rostarion, I replied politely, turning towards the diminutive, round, rodent-like creature. Are you feeling well? Why, yes, I was merely... I paused, my eyes locking onto the new Roma's sudden jolt in the midst of her stride, as if she was suddenly taken over by a ghost or a spirit. Pondering a few matters. The small fairy May shot a look towards the ragtag group in question, his eyes leveling if only for a moment, relaying the true thoughts behind that inoffensive facade. They are no threat to us, Lord Ratom. I can guarantee you this, he stated, in no uncertain terms beneath a veil of secrecy. Practically, yes. They seem to be learning their place, refusing to compete in the accumulation of points even when they very well could. However, it is not the matter of practical competition which concerns me. This answer brought about the raised brow ridges of the black-furred winged Erit, and the ever-tired brown-furred Ulven, the latter of which seemed to have woken through their perpetual days, if only for this subject matter. It is the unpredictable and enigmatic nature of their new Roma compatriot that I am most concerned with, I stated, in no uncertain terms. A weak fielder who works primarily with parlor tricks? Erit responded with a dismissive chuff. Believe me, Lord Quiv, even the enigmatic have their limits. We have already witnessed this during the house choosing ceremony, where the new Roma barely even participated when she had the chance to. A telltale sign that she is capable of nothing else. In short, I believe this new Roma is no different from those overly ambitious candidates that have come before her. For despite all of her bluster, she is nothing more than a fire that burns bright. Just as with any bright flame, there will come a point where it snuffs itself out. The Chateau Roma ended off her tirade with a gleeful grin, wrapping her membranous winged arms around her shoulders in that signature Chateau Roma display of pride. I suppose so, I acknowledged with a nod, not willingly dismissing the fiery response of the Chateau Roma just yet. I know so, she followed up with a sly grin, her eyes locking not on the new Roma, but on her tainted partner. The only class which the new Roma excels in will soon be her downfall. For the first of the specialized gauntlet shall start, and depending on Professor Chiska's inclinations, it may very well begin with the gauntlet of flight. Her brutish inclinations may have served her well for the duration of the introductory challenges, but when it comes to the gauntlets which hedge on these natural latent gifts, we shall soon witness the beginnings of her burnout. This shall leave only the tainted Avenor as my only meaningful challenge, and I will be more than happy to disprove her so-called greater status. There was a venom to Ares' voice that I rarely observed, which prompted me to both clear my throat and deliver her a stern glare. I understand the temptation, Lady Eris. Emotions, most notably those stemming from undue scorn, elicited by an even greater unearned slight, are powerful motivators which can overpower even the most disciplined of minds, I began, eliciting a narrowing of the Chateau Roma's eyes. But I cannot, in my good conscience, allow emotion and emotion alone to govern your actions.
So you would shield the Avenor from my earned vengeance?
She seethed. I would shield us from the repercussions of pursuing a course motivated entirely by emotion and bias, I countered. Do not forget, Lady Eris, that this rivalry between your kind and the Avenor is but a Nexian ruse. The colloquialism, that is Lesser Avenor, was one given to you by a third party. It is, and has never been, one willingly endorsed by the Avenor proper. There was a pause, as I allowed Rostario to follow up on this explanation, reinforcing my claims with peer support.
It is an unfortunate slight which pervades all diplomatic endeavours, but it is one that should be ignored, Lady Eris.
The inoffensive rodent surmised.
Allow the tainted one to make her own blunders, for no amount of learned decorum, nor self-restraint, will prevent her taint from becoming the crux of her eventual downfall.
Lord Relaria's group is a house of cards.
Uven finally chimed in.
A tainted bomb on a short fuse, consisting of an eccentric new roamer with more fire than she has fuel to maintain it, a mercenary prince who struggles in polite society, and a petite minister whose ambitions have far outstripped his capabilities, Nexian as they may be.
Lord Relaria has truly miscalculated his goals at Transgratia, but I cannot blame him, for his calculations were based on what had previously been an assured investment, the personal approach to overlordship of a new realm. It just so happens, though, that this new realmer candidate has proven to be anything but typical of the norm for new realms. I shrugged. But I digress. The man will become but a casualty of his own ambitions. Though if we play our hand correctly, we may still be able to salvage something of a bond, if only with the Nexian wishing to flee his sinking vessel. I shifted my path following their speech, turning back towards the classroom. Ensure our table is prepared for lunch. I need to have a word with Professor Vanavan. The Grand Dining Hall. Local time, 12:05 hours. Thacia. The sudden jolt and shuddering of armor amidst a purposeful stride was both peculiar and gravely concerning. However, I garnered no more clues from Emma's visage as to this sudden misstep from her opaque lenses and featureless face. It was only after we sat down that I focused my attention towards her, but only after the application of a privacy screen and the arrival of our meals. Emma, are you feeling all right? Emma. Shift up, shift down, right arm, left arm, turn, then sink, and sharp left, and fuck! I fell down into an infinite chasm, or at least I felt like I did, as I found myself waking up in one of the worst ways possible, by tripping and falling in my dream, forcing me back to the world of the waking with a violent gasp for air and a screeching skip in my heart's rhythm. I had barely enough time to recover from that before I was thrust into yet another mini-nightmare in the world of the waking, as I felt both arms and legs, and my whole body moving autonomously against my otherwise groggy will. However, unlike that body snatcher nightmare sequence with the null, this automatic movement lurched to a slow and gradual halt the moment the EV detected Operator Mechanical Resistance, or OMR. The gradual return of bodily autonomy and the transfer of motor privileges occurred over the course of seconds, as the EV tried its best to follow the meticulously programmed motor function transferal processes. Practically speaking, this meant that each and every movement felt sluggish at first, a preventive measure against operator error, saving an operator from the embarrassment of falling face first into the dirt, upon rousing from unconsciousness. This was because you had to really fight against the armor to regain control, with every movement of every joint feeling as if they were caked in a thick layer of oobleck, instead of the industry-grade variable resistance lubricant they were always swimming in. In short, it felt like I was being forced through one of those in-armor exercise programs, where artificial resistance was added to mimic weight training. All of this was to say, it felt really weird, especially since all of this was happening just as I was thrust into the waking world, in the middle of a walk. But thankfully, I was trained for this. Your controls. My controls. Despite it being something that was very much not recommended in typical operations, this in-field boot-up sequence was something that the LREF's Rangers pioneered as part of their tactical training regimen. Complete malarkey was what Auntie Ran usually called it. But then again, that was the T-Sec Marine in her talking. Interbranch rivalry always did end up boiling down to poking fun at the weirder quirks found in each respective branch. It was the easiest thing to joke about, after all.
It makes sense why the long-range pleasure cruise forces decided on it.
What do you think they do on their long patrols other than sleep?
Of course they'd be the ones to pioneer sleeping in armor as a valid strat.
Emma? Thacia finally spoke, pulling me out of my daze as I found that I'd autopiloted onto our usual table for lunch. Are you alright? Ah, yeah. Don't worry, I'm just a bit tired from last night, I managed out through an awkward chuckle, as I instinctively moved to rub my eyes, only to once again bonk my armoured hands against the metal of my faceplate. It was small moments like these that made things really frustrating. Because while haptic feedback was available on every part of my body, covered by the undersuit, my face and eyes were tantalizingly out of range. Just don't even think about having an itchy nose, I sighed inwardly. With the group's concerns satisfied, and with everyone now talking amongst themselves, I soon focused instead on the more pertinent task at hand, catching up on class. Evie, give me the Sparkle Notes version of Magic Theory class, please. Acknowledged. Int sum, intel summary, is as follows. 1. There exist 29 distinct forms of mana. Yeah, that fits in line with what we know, I noted, grabbing a Nutripaste tube in the process. Except for the mystery +1 type that we need to get to the bottom of. Continue. 2. Each form of mana corresponds to an elemental form of magic. Elemental is disambiguated as fundamental, and not limited to the classical elements of wind, fire, earth, and water. Ah, classic Vanavan. Semantics upon semantics. 3. The origin of all elemental mana is pure mana, henceforth designated as Type 1, also referred to by Vanavan as primavalic energies. This finally caught my attention, as I began adjusting myself within the core of the armor. Maybe I shouldn't have slept in after all. Keep going. 4. Type 1 mana is derived entirely from the Primavale. Purportedly, the Nexus's unique disc-like shape is conducive to the natural flow and cycling of primavalic energies. I had no response to that, as I watched as an annotated version of the Nexus's supposed shape, a flat disc, was shown to me on the HUD. 5. All mana, but primarily Type 1 mana, emerges through the bottom of the Nexus, through its geological layers, and through discrete openings known as mana springs. The conspiracy theory grade diagram continued, showing what looked to be something superficially analogous to the geomagnetic field lines of planets, except this was more fountain-like than anything, as this mysterious primavalic energy flowed up and through the Nexus's flat disk, and out through distinct points encircling the center of the disk. 6. Each mana spring, owing to its location and nature, has a natural inclination toward one distinct form of mana, as primavalic energies have a tendency to take on elemental form as they travel through the Nexus's geological layers. An example of this was quickly shown on screen, as the recording of Vanavan quickly sketched out the same fiery volcanic realm we saw in one of the souvenir shop's snow globes, denoting it as an Infernium realm positioned at the edges of the Crownlands. Its fiery geography and ecology having formed as a result of its proximity to a mana spring rich in Type 2 mana. 7. There are at least 28 major mana springs within the Nexus, all of which are positioned around the Crownlands, each with a specific inclination towards one of the 28 forms of elemental mana, though each mana well still exudes an equivalent amount of Type 1 mana. Right, I acknowledged warily, wrapping my mouth around the oral induction port as I slowly chewed on the semi-solid baby food. 8. In contrast to this, adjacent realms derive their primordic energies through the tears naturally present in their skies, thus limiting them to a less refined and less reliable source of mana. Though some realms, owing to their similarities to the Nexus's cosmological model, derive their primordic energies from beneath the earth, from their very own primorveils. My eyes narrowed at this, as I shot a gaze towards Thalmin, remembering what he had to say about his realm's local cosmology, and their beliefs on the skies. 9. Vanavan notes that the first of the elemental mana types, being that of flame, correlates with the rise of some of the first magically inclined beasts, the dragons. Subsequent classes will cover each specific form of mana as the year progresses. I simply remained silent, as my eyes went up and down those points, realizing that the class had gone from 0 to 100 real quick, especially when considering how introductory the last class was. Beyond the class itself, though, its content seemed to have just reaffirmed Eleanor's outrageous claims. Hearing it from the Venerian was one thing, but hearing it from Vanavan of all people somehow hammered home the reality of the situation. That the Nexus, at least from the perspective of their own narrative, was in fact a literal Discworld in a bottle. A bottle that seemed to contain an endless source of magical energy. I had to take a moment to process all of that. As I ate in silence, once more leaving the armor to autopilot as I wiggled about inside of it, or as much as I could anyways. So, I'm assuming you actually sensed the mana coming from your skies? I finally blurted out, my question aimed towards both Thacia and Thalmin, who both looked to each other curiously, before turning towards me with a raise of their brows.
Ever the studious one, I see.
Thalmin thus replied with a grin. If you are referring to the seepage of pure mana into our realms, then yes, Emma. Though I can only speak for my realm, as tapisteric principles differ from realm to realm. Thalmin began. However, to get back to your point, yes, we can actually visualize it in a way, though it's difficult to describe considering how you can't. It's fine. I just wanted to quickly double-check Vanavan's claims, I justified, shifting my gaze once again back towards the man's insane illustrations. What the hell is going on? I thought to myself, before once again being brought back down to earth by the arrival of the elven waiter. Ah, thank you, Thacia acknowledged, reaching for one of the glasses awkwardly positioned on his serving tray. Allow me, I interjected, reaching for that same glass in an attempt to play the chivalrous knight, just as another student nearly crossed paths with my swing around. A74, Lord Telios Lothmine. The red-scaled fishman glared at me for that perceived slight, his two golden pupils glowing softly in the afternoon sun. Sorry about that.
I request that you pay more attention to your surroundings. Your bumbling actions very nearly resulted in me being soaked.
The man humphed aggressively, but in a way that felt more akin to one of Thalmin's growls, rather than one of Eleanor's squealing hisses. Again, sorry, I managed out meekly, just as the man turned to leave towards his table of three.
Still not enough sleep, Earthrealmer?
Eleanor shot back dismissively. No, I'm just still trying to process what the heck the Nexus is all about. The Grand Dining Hall. Local time 12:45 hours. Telios.
This new Roma is a frustrating beast, I began, my hands drumming up against the white tablecloth of the dining table.
And yet you seem to halt my attempts at serving her the proper justice she so deserves.
I am halting you from dragging our peer group through unnecessary conflicts, Iphilus, I shot back coldly, causing the serpentine female to recoil.
You will address me by my titles, for you have yet to have earned the right to. Lady Sealat, please.
I thoroughly managed out for a tired breath.
Telios is correct. We cannot and should not blame the Earthroamer's successes for our own failures. We simply were not able to accrue the necessary points in order to achieve third house status. We put in our all,
Iphilus hissed.
So much so that it drained Daltor of his energies.
And yet we failed, I acknowledged with a shrug. This garnered yet another glare of ire from the snake.
How can you be so calm about?
She paused, as a crooked smile formed across her visage.
I see. Both of you have your own games to play, don't you?
She hissed playfully, before turning to the Rantor Lizrealmer.
Especially you. It is more about earning business partners than it is about learning anything fruitful. Moreover, it is about earning new trade vassals in the form of economically weaker new realmers now, isn't it? Perhaps you are too afraid of standing up for your personal pride and dignity, instead trading both away in order to placate the emotions of your new client state. She tottered. Perhaps I truly am the fool here then. A fool for wishing to do well in school.
Grand Concourse of Learning. Betrayance Hall. Local time, 1645 hours. Quiv. The majority of class was once more marred by rather elementary topics, meant to raise those of lesser adjacencies to the standards of those with learned intent. Though a small minority of the time was used to demonstrate those very topics, of which both Ping and I were more than happy to oblige. The demonstration of both pure mana and its conversion to its Infernian form, as well as several back and forths between myself and the brutish Ping, resulted in the destruction of several drapes which the professor seemed to acknowledge as being an unspoken rite of passage. Oris somehow earned more points for his bullish nature, a fact that both baffled and infuriated me, especially as that mindless beast shot me a dismissive glare. Our back and forth had increased following the conclusion of the house-choosing ceremony, as the announcement for class sovereign rapidly approached. Though with the absence of the black-robed professor, only his eternal majesty knows exactly when this would take place. Once again, another frustrating development from an ever-apparent year. However, my efforts quickly shifted, as Professor Vanavan now approached the assignment of this week's homework, as this would prove to be the only and most viable point for me to address that growing itch at the back of my mind. Professor, if I may? Yes, Lord Ratom. Our prior conversations during lunch had preempted this exchange, so I needn't say much to prompt him for this next act. I wish to propose a point of contention towards the apparent aberrancies present in Cadet Emma Booker's homework. This declaration brought about a few murmurs, as the professor nodded warily, grabbing hold of the papers in question. Papers, which themselves were quite distinct from the fine silken reliefs found on most typical Nexian documents. Cadet Emma Booker, would you mind addressing this? The professor clearly kept the point of contention vague, so as to keep the new Roma on the back foot. It's my assignment, Professor, she responded, clearly agitated, confused, and very dearly underprepared for this assault. Is there a problem with it, or? Merely an observation with regards to the medium by which your answers were delivered, the elf continued, once again causing the new Roma growing confusion, if that animalistic cocking of her head was of any inclination. I could only wonder what manner of creature lay underneath that armor, that material overcompensation for civilized decorum. I'm afraid I don't follow, Professor. The new Roma acquiesced. Music to my ears. It is with regards to your particular use of Hynexian, Cadet Emma Booker. For there is an anonymously high degree of calligraphic skill on display within these pages. Thank you? It is as much a compliment as it is a question of the authenticity behind his authorship. Now, I do not doubt the content within, as any student could simply reference texts from the school's library to do so. No, I wish to simply confirm the legitimacy of its authorship by requesting that you write today's assignment up on the board in the same high script as you have done on these pages.
I expected some form of hesitation to arise within the new Roma's response, but there was none to be had. Instead, she simply stood up, requested that she approach the front, and then promptly arrived next to the professor. From there, she was handed an enchanted piece of chalk, which she promptly declined, instead requesting chalk of the unenchanted variety. This elicited a series of gasps from the class, as she now took to the blackboard's ladder and began relaying the professor's words into written form verbatim. It was then that I saw an artist's hand at work. As each and every stroke of her five-fingered hands, and each and every twist of her wrists, were nothing short of perfect. So much so that not a single discrepancy seemed to exist between each chalk stroke, even as the multi-pronged serifs and infamously complicated characters were requested at the behest of the professor. In fact, she went so far as to approach the dreaded five-headed dragon-like character that was Filch, in such a way that I'd hazard to even tackle myself. Moreover, this perfection wasn't merely a result of sacrificing time for the sake of quality. No, it was being done at the pace of the professor's speech.
And that is all for this week's assignments. The professor spoke proudly, but ended up blinking in confusion as the new Roma went beyond the scope of duty by transcribing those words onto the blackboard. You needn't have added that, Cadet Emma Booker. Oh, sorry. I can start over if you'd like. No, this is quite all right. I appreciate your enthusiasm and your academic integrity. Moreover, I wish to express that it was never in doubt, merely that I wish to see your calligraphy in action. The professor continued, garnering a silent nod from the new Roma as she left the front of the class. Just in time for the band to enter through those heavy-set doors, as if to serenade the Earth Roma's small victory, inflating it to something far larger than it should have been.